The first thing the Billionaire CEO did after seeing the janitor job application was freeze, whisper a single forgotten name, and drop the folder from his trembling hands. Every executive in the conference room stared in stunned silence as the most powerful man in the building suddenly looked less like a billionaire and more like a frightened young man haunted by a memory he had spent 20 years trying to bury. One ordinary application had just uncovered a promise that neither time nor success had been able to erase. Before we continue this unforgettable journey, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional story. Rowan Mercer never imagined that applying for the lowest paying position in a glass tower filled with wealthy executives would become the most important day of his life. At 38 years old, his shoulders carried the weight of responsibilities that few people noticed. Every morning began before sunrise, not because he enjoyed early mornings, but because his 8-year-old daughter, Elsie, depended entirely on him. Since losing his wife, Clara, to a sudden illness 4 years earlier, Rowan had become both father and mother. He braided messy blonde hair after watching countless online tutorials, packed lunches that never looked fancy but were always made with love, and read bedtime stories until Elsie fell asleep smiling. He never complained about exhaustion because every sacrifice felt worthwhile when he saw her laugh. Life, however, had not rewarded his determination with stability. Rowan had once worked as a skilled maintenance supervisor for a manufacturing company, but after the factory closed unexpectedly, hundreds of employees found themselves unemployed overnight. Months of searching produced only temporary work. Bills piled higher than hope. Savings disappeared. The apartment grew emptier as furniture was quietly sold to cover rent. Pride slowly gave way to survival. When Rowan noticed an opening for a janitor at Hawthorne Global Industries, he didn't hesitate. Some people might have viewed the position as beneath them, but Rowan believed honest work carried dignity regardless of the uniform. He ironed his only clean button-down shirt, polished shoes that had begun to crack around the edges, hugged Elsie before school, and promised that everything would eventually be all right, even though he wasn't completely sure himself. His application looked ordinary among hundreds of others. Years of maintenance experience. Excellent references. Clean record. Widowed. One dependent child. Then there was his name, Miles Hawthorne, founder and CEO of Hawthorne Global Industries, reviewed hiring reports every Friday, believing that understanding every level of his company kept him connected to reality. Most executives considered it unnecessary. Miles considered it essential. As he turned another page, his breathing stopped. Rowan Mercer, the name pulled him backward through 2 decades of memories he had locked behind walls built from wealth, achievement, and relentless work. He remembered an 18-year-old boy standing outside a bus station with nothing except a backpack, empty pockets, and dreams much larger than his circumstances. He remembered collapsing from hunger during a blazing summer afternoon. Most painfully, he remembered the stranger who had carried him to safety without expecting anything in return. That stranger had introduced himself simply as Thomas Mercer. Thomas had been a school custodian, earning little but giving generously. He invited the frightened teenager into his modest home, shared dinner with his family, found him temporary work, and told him something that shaped the rest of his life: success means nothing if you forget the hands that lifted you before you could stand alone. Miles stayed with the Mercer family for nearly 3 months until he earned enough money to attend business school. Before leaving, he promised Thomas that one day he would repay every kindness. Thomas only smiled and asked him to help someone else whenever life gave him the chance. Years passed. Miles built companies, created thousands of jobs, appeared on magazine covers, and became one of the country's youngest billionaires. He searched for Thomas several times, only to discover the family had moved. Eventually, the trail disappeared. Now, sitting in his office, he stared at Rowan's application with tears threatening to break through years of carefully maintained composure. Could this be Thomas's son? Within an hour, Rowan received an invitation for an immediate interview. He expected a brief meeting with a human resources manager. Instead, he was escorted into the executive floor, where sunlight poured through enormous windows overlooking the city. Miles stood waiting. The moment Rowan introduced himself, Miles noticed the familiar kindness in his eyes. It was the same gentle expression Thomas had carried every day. The interview quickly became something entirely different. Miles asked about Rowan's father. The question caught him off guard. Rowan smiled sadly before explaining that Thomas Mercer had passed away 5 years earlier after quietly dedicating his entire life to helping others. He had never been wealthy, never famous, and never considered himself extraordinary. Yet hundreds of former students, co-workers, neighbors, and strangers attended his funeral because every one of them had been touched by his generosity. Rowan admitted that he often worried he could never become the kind of man his father had been. Miles lowered his head. The room remained silent for several long moments before he finally confessed that Thomas Mercer had saved his life when he was young and desperate. Every success he enjoyed had been built upon the compassion Thomas freely offered a frightened teenager. Rowan listened in complete disbelief. His father had rarely spoken about helping people. Acts of kindness had simply been part of who he was. Miles reached into his desk drawer and removed a faded photograph protected inside a small envelope. It showed a much younger Thomas standing beside an awkward teenage Miles outside an old hardware store, both smiling despite worn clothes and uncertain futures. Rowan had never seen the picture before. His hands shook as tears rolled down his face. For the first time since losing his father, it felt as though another piece of Thomas had returned home. Miles immediately approved Rowan's employment. But not in the way everyone expected. He insisted Rowan begin exactly where he had applied, the janitor position, not because he doubted Rowan's abilities, but because he wanted every promotion to reflect earned respect rather than personal gratitude. Rowan agreed without hesitation. Honest work had never frightened him. During the following months, Rowan quietly became one of the most admired employees in the building. He greeted everyone with warmth, from interns to senior executives. He repaired broken equipment before anyone asked. He remembered birthdays. He noticed when co-workers seemed overwhelmed and offered encouragement without expecting recognition. When a nervous new employee accidentally spilled coffee across an important presentation minutes before a meeting, Rowan calmly helped reorganize everything while reassuring the young worker that mistakes never define good people. People began saying that stressful days somehow felt lighter whenever Rowan was nearby. Miles watched everything without interfering. He saw Thomas's legacy living inside Rowan. Meanwhile, Elsie blossomed. The steady paycheck meant rent stayed current, fresh fruit returned to the kitchen. School supplies no longer required impossible financial decisions. More importantly, Rowan smiled again. 1. Saturday afternoon, Hawthorne Global organized a family appreciation event at a public park. Employees brought children, grandparents, and spouses for games, music, and food. Miles wandered quietly through the crowd without bodyguards. He eventually found Elsie sitting beneath a large oak tree reading a worn storybook. She looked remarkably like photographs Rowan carried of Clara. After introducing himself, Miles asked what she wanted to become someday. She answered without hesitation, someone who helps lonely people smile. The simplicity of her dream struck him harder than any business achievement ever had. Later that afternoon, Rowan discovered Miles sitting alone on a park bench looking toward families laughing together. For perhaps the first time in years, the billionaire admitted something few people knew. Building an empire had cost him relationships. He had sacrificed friendships, ignored family gatherings, and spent birthdays inside conference rooms believing success would eventually make everything worthwhile. Instead, he often returned to an empty mansion. Rowan didn't offer complicated advice. He simply reminded Miles that no amount of success prevented someone from choosing differently tomorrow. Those words echoed Thomas's wisdom so perfectly that Miles laughed through tears. Over the next year, Hawthorne Global quietly transformed. Employee assistance programs expanded, scholarships honored Thomas Mercer's name, emergency childcare became available for struggling parents, mental health support improved dramatically, custodians, receptionists, security staff, and maintenance workers gained seats on employee advisory committees because Miles believed dignity belonged equally to every role. Business analysts credited brilliant leadership strategies. Miles privately knew the truth. 1 Janitor had reminded him what leadership actually meant. Eventually, a management position opened within facilities operations. Rowan earned it through exceptional performance, glowing recommendations, and genuine respect from colleagues across every department. Nobody questioned the promotion, everyone celebrated it. Even after moving into management, Rowan regularly picked up a mop whenever extra help was needed. He refused to believe any task became beneath someone simply because their title changed. His humility inspired countless others. Years later, Hawthorne Global Headquarters unveiled a beautiful bronze plaque near the main entrance. It didn't honor the billionaire founder. It honored Thomas Mercer. The inscription read, "One ordinary act of kindness can become the foundation for extraordinary lives." May we never underestimate the power of helping someone who cannot repay us. Employees paused to read those words every morning. Many never knew the full story. They didn't need to. The lesson spoke for itself. Before we reach the end of this journey, take a moment to leave a meaningful comment and tell us this. What simple act of kindness has changed your life or restored your faith in people? Your story may become the encouragement someone else desperately needs today. On the anniversary of the plaque's unveiling, Rowan stood beside Elsie and Miles in the bright afternoon sunshine. The city buzzed around them, but for a quiet moment everything felt still. Rowan realized that he had entered the building hoping only for a janitor's paycheck. Instead, he had found proof that love outlives loss, kindness echoes across generations, and the smallest acts of compassion often return when we least expect them. His father had never owned a fortune, yet his generosity had created one of the richest legacies imaginable. Miles understood that wealth had finally found its greatest purpose, not in expanding buildings or increasing profits, but in lifting people with the same compassion that had once lifted him. Elsie looked at both men with pride, knowing that the greatest inheritance she would ever receive wasn't money or success, but the courage to care for others even when life felt unfair. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Remember, the greatest lives are rarely measured by what people accumulate, but by the hope they leave behind in the hearts of others.